Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and since you're watching or listening to this program, I urge you to hit the like or the subscribe button. President Trump has been dominating the political discussion, but with all the talk of tariffs and DOGE and also criticizing the judiciary, is he doing the right thing politically? We'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about where the Democrats need to go from here. It's coming up in this edition of Trunk and Tales. And with me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as a state attorney general and also as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. He now teaches law at Duquesne University. Also with us is Keith Schmidt. Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith has his own consulting firm. Our regular two Democrats on the panel, Joe Mystic and Jim Byrne, could not be with us today, so I am pleased to welcome to the panel the former Pennsylvania Auditor General Eugene DePasquale. To this edition of Trunk and Tales. Mr. DePasquale is a Democrat. He also served as state attorney general for 8 years. Gene, thanks so much for joining us for Trunk and Tales. Happy to have you here.
Auditor General.
I'm sorry. Did I say attorney general?
It's okay. Now I'm teaching at Pitt, so.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you.
The governor and I, you know how it's going when we're teaching. So.
Yep. Exactly. Well, welcome anyway, and as former auditor general and not attorney general. All right. Well, perhaps one of my regular analysts, and he's seated with us right now, Keith Schmidt, summed it up best. Whether you love him or you hate him, President Trump's comments and policies have dominated the news cycles. But that domination also comes with critics and, for some, unease about what the future will hold. Tariffs, DOGE, Ukraine and peace talks, and the president's criticism of the judiciary are some of the topics that have been making headlines. We'll get into those in a moment. Also in a moment, we'll discuss the Democrats and their reaction and maybe how they should be reacting to everything that's going on. But first, Governor, let's start with you and this topic, and that is overall your reaction to President Trump's first 2 months in office so far.
Well, it's a very different approach than what I was anticipating. I was anticipating one that would shake up the status quo. But I think this has gone beyond what I was anticipating at this point in time, and I think a lot of people. But Mr. Trump marches to the beat of a different drummer, particularly when it comes to politics, and he's taking this approach, and I think we'll have a better feel of how this approach works 5-6 months from now to see what's been accomplished in addition to the initial, we accomplished this and this. Everything that they're doing seems to be destined to go to the Supreme Court in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, my follow-up to that would be, or not, in addition to that, is I thought they were going to have an aggressive term. It has been much more aggressive, much more fast than I anticipated. I did foresee and actually give him compliments for how they've handled the border. I think, look, as a Democrat, I think Joe Biden did not do a good enough job on that, and I think it was a political vulnerability, and I think Trump filled that vacuum. I am stunned, if not shocked and surprised, for some of the cuts that you're seeing at, whether it be Johns Hopkins, Pitt, CMU, the NIH funding. That was stuff that I did not anticipate.
Well, I would suggest we're, looking at 60 days into a term. It's odd we're doing these type of evaluations, but so much is happening. It almost calls for us to talk about it. But almost every administration, or I should say every administration in my lifetime, they talk about the first 100 days. Hell, we're 40 days away from the first 100 days. So I caution people whether you should. It's premature to praise and it's premature to criticize. It's just, we're only 2 months in. But I can sense something about this administration. When you look at the United States presidency, we know the runway has the potential since Truman to be 8 years. But of course, we now know this president had a term that was interrupted, like Cleveland. This is his second term, and quite frankly, he's 80 years old next year. And the reality is next year is an important midterm election. It feels like more of a first-term midterm than a second-term. Midterms are tough elections. So he really understands he's not looking at an 8-year run. He's looking at around a 18-month run. He needs to prove himself quickly and get his agenda on the books and passed to the degree it can be passed in Congress in the next 18 months, or pretty much if we lose one or both houses of Congress in the fall of next year, the gig's up. I mean, so he is a man on a mission, and maybe I think this whole sense of how aggressive this term has been so far is very purposeful. He's in a hurry.
All right, well, given what you just said, let's talk about some of those things that may or may not assist the Republicans coming up in 2026. Tariffs is a big one, as a matter of fact. The president and his top economic advisors have now indicated that a recession is a possibility, and some of those advisors have gone so far as to say that perhaps a recession is needed to detox government spending. So I have to ask, is this a good political move, given that most people voted for President Trump because of the economy and inflation? I'll throw it at any one of you. Take that answer.
Well, Governor, go ahead. Yeah,
No, you go ahead.
So I'll start off with, look, I am not knee-jerk against all tariffs. I think some tariffs have a role, but as long as they're part of a broader strategy. My concern with how the president is handling the tariffs is that he's for them, then he's against them. He wants them with Canada because of a drug issue, and then the next day they're pulled back, and so I don't see what the broader strategy is. And so you combine that with still the higher prices we have, and again, we could throw the blame around left and right on that. I think that the economy is in very shaky territory, and to me, the biggest concern I have with how the president is managing it is that this is not giving businesses enough confidence to have an investment strategy, and I think it's hurting consumers. So, look, if this continues, I do think if there's a recession, the Republican Party will pay a price in the midterm, but we still have a long way to go for that.
I think the president's actions are that he says he's going to do something, and he expounds beyond what maybe the entire team has thought about, and says, well, we're going to do this. But he always comes back a little bit to a more, not necessarily reduced version, but a more thought out version. I think, in my personal perspective, some of the things he's done or wanted to get done, policy-wise, I don't disagree with. It's the approach-wise of let's just do it. We're going to do it, and if it hurts, well, we'll go back. And I think that when it comes to credibility, anybody else, that hurts their credibility to the general public. To his supporters, I don't think it hurts his credibility at all.
I agree with both your assessments. I do believe that the tariffs are one of those issues that take time, and now I'm not surprised that that's something he's dealing with very early in his term, because it gets worse before it gets better. The only thing I do praise is the fact that for as long as I've been in politics, dating back to interning for Ronald Reagan in 1980, for 45 years, we've dealt with a real trade gap, and the fact that it is a punch in the face of the American economy. And if you're going to make a permanent correction, that has to be addressed. And this is the first time I see somebody laser focused on that to try to change those dynamics. But it does take time. And again, it's not even 2 years now. You have around a year and a half to show the results before you'd be in trouble in the fall of next year.
Yeah, and the danger in that,
Keith,
yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, and that is, Keith, that's a great point on, we've had this trade issue now really going back to the Reagan administration. And look, let's be clear, middle-class, blue-collar workers have been screwed by some of this stuff over a long term. Now, I'm not against free trade, but I think fair trade is certainly a part of this as well. I just think it's important, and maybe this is my criticism of it, the president has not laid out a broader vision for that. So I think you just did a more constructive discussion there than I've seen from President Trump. And I'm not saying that just to throw shade. I just think, he's very good at owning the media narrative. But I'd like to see, the Bill Clintons of the world and the Ronald Reagans that could sell this vision. I think I would like to hear as an American what that vision is to really try to reset that trade imbalance.
And I'm going to bring this back up again, and Keith, you didn't really address it except for maybe what's coming up in 2 years. A recession hasn't started yet, but if there is one, they're not over in like 2 months period of time. It takes a little bit of time to work your way out of it. And if that's the case, then that could spell trouble for the Republicans in 26, couldn't it?
Gov, you want that one?
No, that was for you, Keith. He said it was.
Oh, that was for me. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do believe that is on their mind. It's on the front burner, and they're making every decision based on that. I mean, I can't. It's just not political doublespeak to say everything is focused on the next 18 months. Everything is focused on the next 18 months. They have to make this work. But I remind people, I was in college during the first term of the Reagan administration, and I remember in crowded theater type seats of 300 people in my political science class. I think I was the only one saying "Stay the course" with Ronald Reagan and getting booed off stage and fighting the fight and having a great time doing it. But nobody saw the light there either. I mean, probably the fastest start that showed a great disparity from the predecessor was probably Reagan from Carter up to now. Now that this is much more aggressive. But if you look at the President Reagan's agenda and what he unveiled in the first 100 days, America was turned on its head, and there was a lot of criticism, and he barely made it into the midterm that he was able to hold his own, but it was close, and it wasn't really the glory of Reagan until year 3 and 4 that everybody kept the faith and things turned around for that remarkable landslide in '84. But he like this president was fundamentally changing Washington, and I can't say anybody between that as a young man interning for him in '80 till now that has shifted gears more aggressively than Trump from Biden. So hold on. It's hard to pass judgment yet. We're 60 days in. I can tell you by the time November hits this year, there's going to be a reckoning. They're going to say we're a year away. Is it working or not? And but I think they're going to stay the course to balance of this year.
And Keith, to follow up real quick, and that is, I do think they're operating under a timeline, whether they admit it or not. That is, legislatively, you probably look. I'm happy to come on here and admit I was wrong. I think the Republicans will likely hold the Senate, but I think the Democrats flipping the House is very likely. And so they know their any legislative agenda, you basically have 18 months.
Yeah, and then one other point, I want to move on to some other issues here, and that is, Gene, you brought it up, and I happen to agree with you that while Keith may be right that this president is taking steps that no other president has done for a long time, if any time, the difference is Ronald Reagan had that ability to communicate, and President Trump does communicate, but not in the same way. It's not necessarily reassuring like President Reagan could do.
Well, the difference is President Reagan had been communicating his entire adult life as an actor, and he knew how to communicate. While the present president used to have time on TV, he still is impulsive in some of his statements, and I think that what comes to mind, he puts out there right away before anybody's had a chance to say, "Let's measure this," and we'll see if that continues.
Yeah,
in 1980, people were still watching the three major networks for news and loyally. Yep. And quite frankly, he came into office with not even closely having any type of. He had a big minority actually. The Democrats had a large plurality in the House, so he needed to take his message as a great communicator directly to the American people, and he asked them to call their Democratic congressmen to support him. So it was really necessary. For his communication skills were enormously important because Tip O'Neill held sway in the lower house and by a large margin.
Yes. Keith, in addition to that, because I think you're right on sort of the mechanics of that, Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime that seems to not, and I don't know him personally, but seems to not have a desire to broaden the tent. When I say that, I think he has he won with about 50% of the vote. Every president in my lifetime, whether they were left-leaning or right-leaning, had a desire to probably reach out to about 60, 65%. I just don't see it in Trump's nature. I think he loves poking people that disagrees with him and gets them all riled up. When you saw Governor Corbyn in office, I'd like to think as Auditor General, we had this, and even, Rick Santorum, Senator Santorum, as much as people saw, us as having our different political philosophies, there was an effort to sort of have this broader reach in the message you were trying to do. Donald Trump has no desire to do that. And I'd love to know the rationale for it, but that is a big difference. You take Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan, they were truly preaching to the shining city on the hill, trying to unite everyone under the tent. That is not Trump's MO for whatever reason.
Yeah. Let's move on to another subject here because I want to keep moving here, and that is DOGE. Republicans have complained for years and years about the bureaucracy, the size of it in Washington. Now, this administration is trying to do something about it. But the head of that effort, Elon Musk, as he demonstrated on stage, is using a chainsaw, some say, to reduce the size and the spending of the government. So, while many are applauding his efforts, or this effort by the administration, there are others who are very concerned about organizations that are being gutted that provide services and act as a safety net. So, again, is this the right approach politically for this administration?
I don't think they care.
Yeah, they don't.
I don't think they care. Now, and having been the United States Attorney, been at the Department of Justice quite a bit in my lifetime, the way they've gone after that department just is not considering the long-term effect it will have on the department. Is there fat there? I would guarantee you every department in the federal government has fat. There's fat in a lot of places in state government, in local government, there's fat. But we don't use chainsaws to go after the fat. You use a scalpel, you use a diet. And that's the difference. You have an individual in the head of DOGE, I'll put it at that, who thinks this is a business and it's his business and he's going to do what he doggone feels like. With no empathy, and I'll use that word on purpose, no empathy for the impact on the workers that are going to stay and for the fear that it instills in the workers that are there. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, when I look, and this is where the governor and I, we had a good relationship, period, but we worked together well. When I was Auditor General, he was the governor, and we went about our business. You know, I made a couple mistakes early on. I'm sure he did as well, and you learn from it and move on. But the point is, like, there is waste out there. And as a former Auditor General, I'm not going to take, I think my party makes a mistake when we try to pretend like there is no waste out there. But how you go about your business and how you go about finding those problems and how you reveal those to the public and work with the agencies to fix those problems matters a lot. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't like how they talk about the federal workers. But for luck and timing, any of us could have been there as well. Those people are dedicated. And if it's a program that isn't needed anymore, fine, get rid of it. But they're not bad people. In fact, many of them have dedicated their lives to public service. And the biggest beef I have with some of these cuts is what's happening on the healthcare research side of it. My brother had muscular dystrophy. University of Pittsburgh lost their muscular dystrophy researcher as a result of some of these NIH cuts. And again, I know that's personal to me, but I can't think of one voter that said, "Hey, let's get rid of muscular dystrophy research."
Well, the polling suggests that that the American people are still squarely behind finding efficiencies and narrowing the size of government, and I think the reason that is the Biden administration created an extreme vulnerability for the federal workforce. When the sitting president raised his right hand and swore on a Bible on January 20th, only 3% of the federal workforce was working full-time in the office. And people were outraged by that number. There was no reason this far away from COVID that he should not have had more federal workers return to work. And a lot of people point just to the cost savings of this. I actually look at the efficiency side of it, but I'm more of an inside tiger on this because I spent a generation with a federal official, with the United States congressman and a senator, and I know then when I went to these bureaucracies, when I went to these different cabinet positions and whatnot down in Washington and needed something, especially in the years that Rick was in leadership and we would think we'd get something quickly, something that I would suggest should have taken 2 hours in the private sector could take 2 months sometimes down there. You scratch your head thinking, where does the buck stop? There's too many people that have to sign off on this. We want something fairly simple and it's not happening. So I understood the problem with something that large going at a snail's pace and having no efficiency. So I welcome this type of change to a degree. But again, am I concerned with specific cuts like Eugene and the governor talked about? Absolutely. I mean, there's some there that we have to rethink. And already we saw, a couple weeks ago, the chainsaw was brought back a little bit when the president said, okay, I think we're going to pivot to the cabinet members to allow them to, within their own departments, hold sway and decide where the cuts can occur. I think we all agreed with that. So you're right. He came out guns a-blazing, but at least he's mature enough to come back and maybe reassess along the way.
I would add this, and this is my analogy, and I've said it to many people. They came out with the concept of fire, ready, aim.
Yeah.
Right. Fire,
Fire,
ready,
ready,
aim.
aim.
Correct.
Yep. Exactly. Let's keep moving on here if we can. So, what are the stakes politically for President Trump into trying to negotiate this peace deal between Ukraine and Russia?
Let me start off there. I'm going to maybe take a little bit of an interesting take. That thing that we saw, and I just say thing, that, the Oval Office, I don't have a problem with anything President Trump, Vice President Vance, or President Zelensky said. My beef was it happened in public. That was a conversation that should have happened in private, because I think it gave away too much of our negotiating position publicly, because then Putin is literally watching it. To me, we all want peace there, and I appreciate that President Trump is pushing for peace, but I don't like whether it was Ukraine, Russia, or our position should be given up publicly. My biggest beef with what everyone did there was that happened on television. That conversation should have happened in private.
I would agree with you on that. However, I'm not sure that President Trump didn't like doing that. And it was sending a message to Putin, or at least one that he thought Putin would like to hear. I think we're at a stage where the leader of the free world and the leader of Russia think they know each other, but they don't trust each other and would stab each other in the back if they had a chance.
I agree with everything the governor said.
One of the things that came out of that was an increased rhetoric from our partners across the pond, saying that Europe's going to take a larger role. And I wasn't surprised in the polling that came out right after that. The American people put a huge thumbs up, saying, hey, we should support them. They shouldn't support us. I mean, 1945 is 80 years away. It's 80 years ago. I know we won the war and we brought peace to a continent and to the world, but they've had 3 economies since then. We no longer should have to hold the margin call on things like this. That's in their part of the hemisphere. That's in their continent. They should play a larger role. And also, it's an unpopular thing to say, but how badly do we want peace? And I think in some rough way, and he's a roughneck at times, the president, he's asking that question because it's not going to be a fair peace. I can tell you that. We're dealing with only one nuclear power. We're dealing with the people that we primarily support financially and with military arms, Ukraine, a country that cannot wage war without the help of others. And we're dealing with the fact that the dictator in Russia has food tasters when he's in Russia. So he's not on the stablest grounds. So it can't be a completely fair, hey, we back up, everybody goes home, and we're going to have peace. You almost have to find a way to make both sides feel like they've got something or won this, or it's not going to get done. And the more vulnerable person, for all the people worried about the Ukrainian leader, the ones that's, in my mind, that's on more unstable ground is Putin. And he has to be careful of what he negotiates here. So we have to all decide, how badly do we want peace? Because it's going to be imperfect. And unfortunately, I think Ukraine's going to end up having to cede some land. But this horrific killing of tens of thousands of people, civilians and military, has to end. The bloodshed has to end. We got to figure out a path.
I want to end this with, but I will throw this out. And maybe I'm too Machiavellian, and maybe I'm giving the president too much credit on this one. But I do find it interesting that after the phone call with Putin, all of a sudden there's this talk that the United States will own the power grid or the power sources in Ukraine, which means, of course, that if Russia were to attack those, then they're attacking something of the United States. And now he's got, if that goes through, he's got that against Putin. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm too Machiavellian and maybe there's nothing to that, but that's what it kind of seems like to me.
Stacy, I don't think you can be too Machiavellian in what we're going through right now. We're trying to figure out what moves are being made by somebody who, in our side of the world, is completely unpredictable in this. Now, the one thing he has done, and maybe this was the secret sauce to all this, he's made the European countries step up and realize they really got to protect themselves. They really got to come together. They really have to start investing to protect themselves from Russia. And maybe the United States won't be there because they always know, oh, the United States will come to our rescue. Not going to happen, or at least it's going to happen, I would think. But now they are uncertain enough that they are doing something about it finally after 80 years.
I also find it very. Go ahead, Gene.
Specifically when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, both sides, and Keith is right. Obviously, Russia is because they're a nuclear power, has significant say in this process. But if it's going to be lasting peace, both sides have to buy into it. And if both sides don't buy into it, it's not going to last. So whatever it takes to get both sides to buy into this is critical.
All right.
My fear is this is more of a family dispute, and maybe I'm minimizing it, that you can never get everybody to agree.
Yeah, that could very well be it.
30 years from now, it could flare up again.
Right.
All right, we want to move on here. President Trump, of course, is not the first president to criticize rulings from the judiciary. President Obama, in a State of the Union address, with the Supreme Court justices seated right in front of him, criticized their decision on Citizens United regarding campaign contributions. President Biden criticized the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade and wanted an ethics panel established to oversee the justices. But neither Obama nor Biden called for a judge to be impeached or removed from office because that judge ruled against them. So, again, I asked, is this a good move by the president to call for impeachment of federal judges?
I think his base loves it, but I am disturbed by it. I am okay with the president saying they disagree with the decision. I think that's part of public life. But calling for the impeachment when there's no evidence that this guy did anything wrong, you may disagree with the decision. When I say didn't do anything wrong, you can disagree with the decision, but there's no evidence of any impropriety. And as someone who, President Trump, who was impeached twice and criticized both of those as being overly political, I think unless you've got evidence that the judge did something unethical or improper, I think you have every right to ask for an appeal, but calling for an impeachment is beyond the pale in my view.
Well, his doing this, again, affects any credibility outside of MAGA world. In his strong supporters, yeah, that's the thing that should happen. Those of us who deal with impeachments, who are in the judicial system, in the political system, we understand they're not going to impeach somebody over a judicial decision unless it was proven that there was fraud or illegality in that decision. And that's not going to happen in this one. And he's going to see many more potentially decisions going against him. So he may be setting this up as, see, the judiciary is against what we're trying to do and making them the boogeyman to the strong right.
As a very young man, 51 years ago, when I saw my hero have to step aside because of the threat of impeachment, I learned as a very young man what impeachment meant and the seriousness of it. But I can tell you the times also have created where we are with impeachment. I think the fact that so many Americans see it now not as what it should be, a very grave situation, but more of a political tool. And because it was used as a political tool, I think in some ways by the opposing party, he's using it now as a political tool. I don't think there's any chance that there's going to be anything, much to do about nothing, that we're not going to impeach this judge. But he understands what that is in people's minds, so he suggests that. So it's a dangerous place to be. I'm not comfortable with it either, gentlemen. But now I have to impress upon our listeners that years ago, we didn't throw around the word impeachment or pursue it like we have in the last decade.
Agreed.
Very true.
Yeah,
Very true.
That's spot on, Keith. I mean, starting up until Bill Clinton, I think it'd been, Nixon and Andrew Johnson were the only times in our nation's history. Now, whoever the next president is, they're going to start the impeachment bumper sticker before they're even sworn in.
Yep.
Right?
It seems
It's
that
unhealthy.
way. Yep. All right, we need to move on. And Keith, I'm going to ask you not to smile too broadly when I start this, okay? And that is, and Gene, this is going to be on yours. These are some headlines recently. In a mid-February poll by Blueprint, a firm affiliated with Democrats, 65% of voters agreed with a statement, quote, "No one has any idea what the Democratic Party stands for anymore other than opposing Donald Trump." Another headline. Democrats are busy fighting over what to fight over. Another one. Progressives want confrontation, while moderates fear that that will turn off the centrist voters and can put them back in power. Democrats are cratering and waiting for Godot. And one of the latest ones, Schumer faces growing House Democrats' call to step down. These headlines they don't sound good for your party, Gene.
Stacy, you're breaking up. I didn't hear any of that. I saw the one poll I saw where like the Democratic Party approval rating was 28%, and I wanted to find out who the 28 were. Leaderless, rudderless. And I will give my own. Maybe somebody's listening, maybe not. I never fall into the just oppose everything across the board. I think we've got to offer an alternative vision. I think we've got to answer to why many blue-collar, even union members who were part of our base for practically my entire adult lifetime have walked away from us, and you never blame the voter. You got to do a better job of listening. We as Democrats have to do a better job of listening, and we have to offer, I think, specifically an economic agenda that meets the times. And until we do that, those numbers are not going to change. I think on issues like reproductive freedom and some others, I think we're on the side of the public. But I think we lost this election because of the economy, because the D.C. Beltway was basically looking down on people that were struggling economically, that were saying that, inflation's not that bad. Well, for a lot of Americans, it was bad. And if we don't find an economic message and a plan that talks to that segment of the electorate and to the broader electorate as a whole, those numbers are not going to change.
So would you say that it's better to take that approach than to criticize everything the president does, and not everything, but criticize the president?
What was that nursery rhyme or whatever, the boy that cried wolf? I think that you should pick specific things that you think the president is wrong on. For me, it's like the NIH funding. For me, the approach on how he's dealing with the federal workforce. To me, the up and down with tariffs. That's me. But just sitting there doing interpretive dances at the USAID office, that's not going to cut the mustard. I think we've got to talk, but we also have to talk to the concerns of average Americans. They're still concerned about prices, their 401ks. I think a lot of parents are concerned about the cost of college tuition for their kids, or how do we get them into the right trade school. We need to have an economic agenda that meets the times. And I pay attention to this stuff as much as anyone. I haven't seen any of that out of Washington, D.C. I will say two people, Bernie and AOC. I don't always agree with their politics, but they are talking to these issues and they're saying something. And that's why people are saying, well, at least they're saying something. I give the two of them enormous credit because they're out there with the guts to actually talk about an actual agenda, even if I don't agree with every single nook and cranny of it.
I think we're in a period of time, and I'm going to go back to using this, that the messages are communicated this way, so through social media. And in the days prior to this, both parties were able to control their messages a little bit better and keep everybody following along that message. Now anybody is a political party. Any group becomes a political party. And you see that fracturing not just within political parties, but I think across the nation, that we have become so divided because of what we see or don't see, or what's true or what's not true in social media, that nobody trusts anybody that doesn't agree with them 100%. And you see a lot of people, I think, in the middle that just sit back and keep quiet because they don't want to offend anybody. And politics is not a occupation that you're able to not offend people. You're going to offend somebody who doesn't agree with you. Even people that agree with you aren't going to agree with you 100% of the time. And oh my goodness, if you don't agree with them 100% of the time, now they don't agree with you. The times have just changed so much, and I have been doing this now for 2 years, saying social media has had a tremendous impact on the political and social fabric of this country.
Keith, you want to wrap it up for us?
I'm limb here, if I could make a prediction. I do think that the Democrats need a new message, and I agree with Eugene. It probably is going to be economic. They desperately need a new message. But more importantly, before you can ever articulate that message or strengthen that message, they need a leader. They need someone to articulate for all media, conservative, liberal, moderate, international, all go to that same woman or man because that person is leading that party. And my prediction is, because of what is an almost unbelievable comeback from somebody who was, that stumbled through COVID, in the current president, who denied the election, who lived through January 6th, who was, multiple impeachments, indictments by a criminal court. I mean, to the point where that person came back into office and won the working class and swept every swing state. At that point, we know there's an issue. So I don't think anybody that is currently or participated in any way, shape, or form in last November's election on behalf of the Democrats is out. I have a feeling we're going to see the visions of 1991 and 92 when an obscure Arkansas governor came through the ranks who had no history whatsoever in national politics and was able to take over. And I have a feeling the next leader of the Democratic Party, we don't know.
Right.
And if that happens, that's more of a threat for us in 26 and 28 than anybody that's on the dais right now.
No, by the way, Keith, I think you're spot on. I think the next nominee, if they're going to win the general election, is probably someone that isn't on anyone's list right now. That they're going to go and they're going to catch fire in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. And it's because when we as Democrats have done well, we have found a fresher face that is out there. And to me, retreading other people, and again, I'm not trying to disparage anyone's career out there and people that have dedicated their life to public service. But even when Obama won overwhelmingly, we did start to know his name, but he was a fresh face to the public. And Bill Clinton really came from, maybe the insiders knew who he was, but he came from absolute nowhere to the public. It's going to be someone like that.
Exactly. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue our look at politics on our next episode. Again, if you are watching or listening to this podcast, I urge you to hit the like or the subscribe button. And right now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again in about 2 weeks.